I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. This is the North American Climate Justice Team Climate Change webinar. We appreciate your attending the second webinar in our series, Prophetic Courage for a Just Transition. Now, in September, Stacey Cram, a member of the First Presidency, provided us a challenging and very relevant presentation on the role of the church in providing prophetic courage for the future ahead. You can view her presentation in the archives on our website, which is seaofchristclimatejustice.com. Now, if approved, Stacey will be ordained the new prophet president of Community of Christ at the 2025 World Conference. There have been 3 resolutions proposed by various teams for consideration at that same World Conference. Each team was working independently of the other. Each was responding to the church's declaration that we are, indeed, in a climate emergency. Each of these resolutions proposes that we do more than declare an emergency. As Stacey reminded us, we have choices to make as a community, and we must act. Today, we're going to look at these 3 resolutions. Each will be presented by a member of the team that created them, and you'll have an opportunity to ask them questions to clarify the intent and impact of the proposed legislation. As an introduction, I'd like to provide you with a quick one-page summary of the content of each resolution. G11, Climate Change Emergency Call to Action, focuses on responding in socially responsible ways. And that means creating resources in terms of the interaction of climate change and human rights, recognizing the rights of climate refugees, and referring the other responses to the First Presidency for consideration. And asking for a statement that would be presented at the next World Conference. G5, Climate Emergency, Fossil Fuel Reduction, calls for a just and fair transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. It asks us to support the stopping or the decrease of fossil fuel infrastructure, not to expand it, but to decrease it, to divest from fossil fuel investments, and it calls on church members to support a just and responsible fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. G10, Earth Stewardship Affirmation, is our third piece of proposed legislation, and it has a broad range of actions in a wide variety of church endeavors. The production of curriculum, sustainable standards for new church construction, and a transition to sustainability for existing buildings. It proposes that each local area create their own climate colloquy on environmental issues, of course, and calls for children and youth projects to engage the young people. It also supports exploration into green research and the issues of justice in climate change. Now, those 3 resolutions overlap in some ways, and they stand unique and separate in other ways. So here's an attempt to summarize the similarities and differences. Note that each of the 3 includes justice issues, which are highlighted in turquoise. The first and the third also call for the development of classes to continue the exploration of environmental issues. That's in the purple. The second proposal stresses a halt to fossil fuel expansion and divesting from fossil fuel investments, and that's in green. And it's the only one that calls for those things. The third proposal has several actions around sustainable facilities, climate colloquies, youth activities, and green research. Those are the yellow content, and they don't appear in any of the others. Now, if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's okay, don't worry. Each of our presenters is going to talk about their own resolution and give you a little better understanding of the intent. This is just a preliminary summary to help us get started. Okay, Joan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Susan. As Susan has mentioned, we have with us today a representative from each of the 3 sponsoring teams, And each of them will have about 18 minutes to share with us and to answer some initial questions. While each is speaking, send your questions in the chat to Dean White, who will cover as many of them as time allows at the end of each segment. Depending on how our time goes, we anticipate having another 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions. Please make sure when you're sending questions to Dean that you identify which speaker your question applies to. Our first speaker will be Jim Ash, representing the World Church Human Rights Team and speaking to G11. A native of Southern California, Jim attended Graceland University and UCLA School of Law. He practiced business law for over 40 years. With deep roots in agriculture, Jim helped clients find their best solution as he guided some of the world's best-known food and food systems companies, investors, and financiers. And from 2015 to 2022, Jim served as an appointee of President Barack Obama to the 7-member board for international food and agricultural development. This board counsels the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, otherwise known as USAID, on matters relevant to world hunger and food insecurity, and works to ensure that the full benefits of the resources and research of U.S. colleges and universities are used to address worldwide food insecurity. Jim serves as a high priest in Community of Christ and attends the Wood Chapel congregation in Lee's Summit, Missouri. Our second speaker will be Paul Bethel, representing the GPNW-sponsored North American Climate Justice Team, speaking to G5. Paul and his wife, Jackie, live in Huntington Beach, California, and are co-pastors of the Gardena congregation. Paul and Jackie Braby first met at Lamoni High School when both their parents were working at Graceland. After a career in the automotive industry, which was very dependent on fossil fuels, upon retirement, Paul was asked by his Mission Center president to be the Pacific Southwest International Mission Center liaison with the GPNW Climate Justice Team. It was his involvement with this climate justice team that sparked his interest and concern about what we are doing to sacred creation. He accepted our invitation to join our team and since has studied and researched and become involved with many other climate-related causes and organizations. Paul refers to himself as a reformed gearhead and hopes to help move our denomination closer to the front of the faith-based climate justice endeavors. Our final speaker will be Rick Bunch, representing the World Church Earth Stewardship Team, speaking to G10. Rick is a former high school biology teacher, university professor, and department chairman for parks management. He has served as dean of a 5-university natural resources consortium for the Tennessee Valley Authority. He has a BA from Graceland in biological sciences, a master's, and a doctorate in parks management and environmental education from Indiana University. He's a retired appointee with assignments as campus minister at Graceland, Tulsa Stake president, and president of the Chesapeake Bay Mission Center. He has served tirelessly as the chair of the Earth Stewardship Team since its inception in 2016. So with that brief introduction to our speakers, I'll turn the floor over now to Jim Ash.
There you go. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Great. And you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Great. So thanks for having me. Being with you actually meets one of our committee's identified action steps, and that is to inform as many people as we can about the plight of millions of our fellow Earth citizens who are often called the forgotten refugees. Why are my slides not moving? Hold on. I apologize. Something happened to my slideshow.
But it's a nice looking slide. We're enjoying it.
Good.
Jim,
Well,
Jim, you
yeah.
may have to stop share screen, get back into it, and when you click on something to show us, don't click on your presentation. Click on our picture or your picture up at the top left corner, and then click share. That will allow the computer to shift our view along with yours. Otherwise, we're just stuck with the first thing you click on.
Again, and I do apologize, everyone.
Okay, so click on the top left icon that has our pictures on it, or your picture, maybe one or two pictures.
Yep.
Okay, and then click share,
Mm-hmm.
and then click what you want to show us, which is your PowerPoint presentation. Okay, now see if you can change slides.
No, it's still not changing. I apologize.
Huh.
Sometimes you
weird.
can't do it off. It depends on your computer. Sometimes there's a toggle button in your presenter's screen that you actually have to physically go and click instead of using the way it does when you're not in screen share. So it's matter of finding the right
There we
toggle.
go.
There you
There
go.
we go. All right. So here are the members of our team. This is our membership is diverse in age, culture, and experience. We have world church ministers, ordained and non-ordained members, and members with advanced degrees and who work in social services, law, and education. The Community of Christ has a long and deep theological-based interest in human rights issues. The Peace and Justice Action Team has gathered a comprehensive set of World Conference actions available at the website shown here. And the other items shown here have particular connection to our work. In World Conference Resolution 1184, the Church encouraged support of organizations and movements specifically working to secure human rights. It directs that the World Church study human rights and human rights violations and make its findings and recommendations available to the membership. And then it's significantly, who is then encouraged to make the issue a subject of continuing prayer, fasting, study, and consideration for personal commitment and action. World Conference Resolution 1197 in 1986 established the World Church Human Rights Committee. And in Resolution 1325 in 2023, the Church joined what was then 1,800 plus jurisdictions in 33 countries, declaring a climate emergency. And perhaps Doctrine and Covenants 163.4b says it best. The earth, lovingly created as an environment for life to flourish, shudders in distress because creation's natural and living systems are becoming exhausted from carrying the burden of human greed and conflict. Humankind must awaken from its illusion of independence and unrestrained consumption without lasting consequences. The general purpose of our committee is to assist the First Presidency in better understanding current human rights issues and to suggest possible World Church and World Conference action, including policy statements or legislation. And last year, our team was specifically asked to focus not just on climate change, but to report on and propose legislation concerning climate change refugees. Our methodology was to divide our team into different areas and then search out and review a wide variety of materials from informed sources, including the United States government, the United Nations, World Health Organizations, and other international organizations. These research materials, scientific and economic studies, and their assessments and recommendations were tremendously informative. We also sought to reach a common understanding of a couple of key definitions. When thinking about the term climate change or climate crisis, we consider changes in average weather conditions that persist over multiple decades. Climate change includes changes in temperature, precipitation patterns, the frequency and severity of weather events, and other features of our climate system. Climate refugees, as I said, are often called the forgotten victims of climate change. They're identified as people who have been forced to leave their traditional habitat temporarily or permanently because of marked environmental disruption. And they face specific physical and mental health needs and safety risks, particularly as they cross borders, including malnutrition, increased incidence of waterborne diseases such as cholera, barriers to healthcare resources based on gender, culture, financial, social, and linguistic limitations, and abuse and exploitation. We started with an assessment. We wanted to put everybody on the same page. The creation we call Earth is a combination of 5 interconnected spheres: the lithosphere, land masses, the atmosphere, the various gases trapped by our gravity, the biosphere, what we call the animal and vegetable kingdoms, and the hydrosphere, the water-covered areas, and finally, the cryosphere, areas covered by ice. The last several climate cycles have shown significant rising of air, atmospheric, and water, hydrospheric temperatures. The average temperature of the Earth's surface is now about 34 degrees warmer than it was in the late 1800s, just before the Industrial Revolution. It is warmer than at any time in the last 100,000 years. The last decade was the warmest on record, and each of the last 4 decades has been warmer than the previous decade. These microclimate changes have impacted and been impacted by the other spheres of creation, leading to an imbalance in their symbiotic connection. A warmer atmosphere contributes to the reduction of polar ice caps and glacial areas. Primary impacts, such as melting glaciers and ice caps and rising sea level, lead to secondary impacts, like the inflow of higher salinity water into low-lying lands, making them unfit for vegetation. The melting also reduces the area of the Earth's surface that reflects solar radiation, further intensifying both land and ocean temperatures. Changing atmospheric conditions driven by warmer air and ocean temperatures directly impact the distribution of precipitation, expanding areas of desert into what were once productive prairie and savanna lands. Milder temperatures and historically cooler environments lead to increases in destructive insect populations and viral and bacterial plant infections. To put it simply, when one of the 5 spheres is stressed, all the other 4 interdependent spheres are pushed out of rhythm or balance. Climate scientists have shown that humans are responsible for virtually all global heating over the last 200 years, primarily from the creation of greenhouse gases. These gases act like a blanket wrapped around the Earth, trapping the sun's heat and raising temperatures and warming the world faster than at any time in the last 2,000 years. The primary effects of climate change create a series of secondary impacts that specifically relate to the human condition. An impact of increased air and ocean temperatures, changing weather patterns in areas where economies are highly dependent on agriculture. These areas in particular have seen increased poverty and malnutrition, shrinking national economies, and finally, the element on which our committee was charged to focus, the involuntary movement of people away from their historic homelands because these regions no longer provide food and shelter they need. The Earth's population has increased 4-fold over the last 100 years. At the current rate of increase, world population is expected to reach just under 10 billion souls at the end of the next 15 years. This significant change in the biosphere will continue to have an adverse impact on the delicate balance with and among the rest of creation. The reliance on fossil fuels for power generation, manufacturing, and transportation, together with deforestation and food production, are the principal drivers of our current climate change. Overconsumption and a growing culture of consumerism also contribute to the crisis. The richest 1% of the global population accounts for more greenhouse emissions than the poorest 50%. And while we acknowledge and affirm these facts, we accept the scientific evidence that the climate is changing, and in turn is changing our Earth. We reaffirm that those causes need to be analyzed and, to the extent humanly possible, addressed to alleviate conditions adversely affecting human rights. In June 2022, the number of displaced persons worldwide reached an all-time high of over 100 million. Although they are temporary, weather-related disasters are increasingly becoming a major cause of displacements. According to the United Nations, they have caused approximately 21 million human displacements each year since 2008. The number of weather-related disasters almost tripled in the last 40 years, and their frequency and intensity are exacerbated by climate change. According to the World Bank, without urgent national and global climate action, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America will witness more than 140 million people on the move by 2050. The Institute for Economics and Peace predicts that as many as 1.2 billion people could be displaced worldwide over the next 15 years due to natural disasters from climate change. Environmental degradation disproportionately affects individuals, groups, and peoples already in vulnerable situations. This includes women and girls who, because of pre-existing gender inequalities and discrimination, are disproportionately affected. But it also affects everyone compelled to move within and across borders due to sudden or even slow onset climate-related disasters. These refugees face life-threatening issues of resource scarcity, abuse, and exploitation in their search for new homes. All aspects of basic human rights are impacted, including the rights to life, adequate housing, education, clean water, nutritious food, health, personal security, and cultural identity. Migration due to environmental crises is often seen by governments as a threat, and its management is increasingly militarized and security-centered. Instead, governments should address this migration in ways that fully respect and guarantee human rights. Governments should look for ways to protect these displaced people by facilitating pathways for safe and regulated migration. We should recognize that migration is part of human history and diversity. It enriches us and has always been part of humanity's development and progress. All of us, individuals, governments, and the private sector, should embrace a human rights-based approach to migration that puts people at the center and recognizes the drivers of environmental and climate-related migration, starting with unsustainable consumption and production. To address these issues, our committee is developing what we call a hierarchy of identified needs. The refugee crisis seems so overwhelming, it can paralyze us into inaction. There are so many people, and the need is so great that the problem can seem unfixable. However, ignorance and inaction are not acceptable. Community of Christ is specifically called to care for the earth and for our brothers and sisters who inhabit it with us. To help overcome this bias towards ignoring the reality of human pain and suffering caused by climate change, we are preparing a wide range of recommended activities for the church to begin to address the issues. Our report is still in preparation, but we are attempting to identify this hierarchy of immediate, near-term, and long-term needs and responses. We believe this approach will allow the church and its members to feel empowered to act rather than to feel overwhelmed and impotent. For instance, one immediate need is clearly to raise awareness of the plight of climate change refugees and the factors that cause the climate changes we're experiencing. Additionally, individuals, the church, and governments should increase contributions targeted at the needs of those driven from their homes and livelihoods by climate-related events. In the near term, we call on governments to provide safe pathways for these refugees and to recognize them as legitimate asylum seekers, providing legal protection for their rights as they seek to reestablish their homes and families in new countries. In the long term, we must address the worldwide dependence on fossil fuels and develop and implement reliable and sustainable energy sources for the world's ever-growing population. So let's go through our proposed legislation. First, we seek multi-level participation. We call for a response to come from all levels of the church, headquarters and the international church body, and at the individual, congregational, and regional levels. Our report will contain specific examples of recommended action, but the resolution intentionally leaves up to the actors the decision of what actions should be taken, allowing flexibility to address the issue in keeping with their cultural and political contexts. Resolve that Community of Christ identify and act on ways that it may, in socially responsible ways, respond to the climate change emergency, and that it encourage its members at an individual, congregational, and regional level to do likewise. In sections 2 and 4, we emphasize the need for education and advocacy. These are necessary preparatory steps to create an informed and action-driven people. Resolved that the First Presidency direct the Temple School or another appropriate body to develop educational materials over the next 3 years to establish a curriculum with components appropriate for youth and adults, designed to raise awareness of the climate change emergency and promote ways to respond to this. And that the First Presidency direct the Temple School or another, oh, sorry, this got printed twice. I apologize. We'll have to look at the resolutions at the end to pick this up. I apologize. Next, we specifically call out the need for global recognition of persons displaced by climate change events as protected refugees. The current accepted legal definition of refugee is a person who has crossed an international border owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. Unlike war or persecution, people typically cannot claim asylum based on climate change reasons alone. That's why climate change refugees are often labeled the world's forgotten victims. Declined refugee status means that these people have limited legal protection for their human rights and face risk of confinement and deportation. The Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration states that governments in receiving countries should work to protect climate refugees by devising planned relocation and visa options if adaptation and return to their countries of origin is not possible. Resolved that the Church as a global Christian community declares that it supports the call for more inclusive national laws and policies and international coordination, including treaty or treaties of the United Nations that recognize the legitimate refugee status of persons forced to leave their homes and countries as a result of climate change. The issue of climate change and its impact on human rights, including, but not limited to those of the hundreds of millions of people forced from their homes, livelihoods, and homelands, is complex, implicating local and national borders, politics, and economics. Further study and deeper understanding are needed, and sooner rather than later. Resolved that the responsibility for continued response by the Church to the climate change emergency be referred to the First Presidency for the adoption of further reports and/or official statements, and if deemed appropriate by the First Presidency, additional legislation to be presented to the 2028 World Conference. Thanks very much for your attention. I know it's drinking from a fire hose, but I think we might have time left for questions. I'll turn that over to the moderator, and I will stop sharing my screen.
So we're running a little bit behind. And so if you have questions, please put them in the chat, particularly related to clarifying this particular resolution or the information that was presented in relation to its resolves. And then there'll be time at the end of the 3 presentations for bringing those questions to the fore. And so with that, I'm going to turn to Paul Bethel and have him begin his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I'll warn you, you may hear some of the same themes. Over the course of my presentation. So let me share my screen here. Oops. Okay. So I stumbled on a fun fact the other day I thought I'd share with you to start with. There's a phenomenon in Kyoto, Japan called hanami. And the hana character denotes flower, and the mi character can be used as see or to look. So the literal translation of characters is the flower see. The actual translation would be cherry blossom viewing. And it turns out that the peak day for viewing the blossoms in Kyoto has been tracked since the early 800s. Not 1800s, the early 800s. And if they have a cool spring, the bloom is, later in the year. And if it's a warm spring, the blossoms come out earlier. So for roughly 1,000 years, the average cherry blossom peak has been between 100 and 110 days into the new year, on average, sometime mid to late April. The past several decades, since about 1960, the Hanami peak has been coming earlier and earlier as our Earth heats up. While the 20-year average is in the low 90s, because it's an average, 2021 boasted the earliest Hanami date on record at 85 days, until, according to Our World in Data, this year was 84 days. So, some people just go on and on about pollution and acid rain and then the ozone layer, and then it was greenhouse effect, and now it's climate change. And so most of us have heard this off and on for maybe nearly our entire lives. But last year was the hottest year on record since we started keeping temperature records, maybe 250 years or so. And scientists state that they can extend or extrapolate those temperature records, with representative samplings of glacial ice cores or analyzing ancient lake and ocean sediment, or tree rings and such. So science is pretty insistent on proclaiming that the hot days last year on this planet and so far this year are the hottest days that we've had on this Earth in 125,000 years at a bare minimum. So 125,000 years ago, the anthropologists tell us, when pre-Homo sapiens first started, making little marks and symbols on bones and such things. So no human society that we would recognize as a society has ever lived on a planet as hot as the one we are living on now. So yes, it has been hotter in the past, not when we were around. So life as we know it, civilization, loosely defined, has developed in the past 10 to 12,000 years. And the stable climate that allowed human society to develop was called the Holocene. And during this epoch, our average global temperature, the key word being average, skeptics always go, oh, what about that one cold day last year? The average temperature during this time did not fluctuate more than 1 degree up or down. This was the sweet spot that allowed us to thrive, to grow food, cities, and such. Roughly 10 years ago, in 2015, the United Nations Paris Climate Agreement was signed by 195 countries and the European Union, essentially almost every recognized nation state on Earth. And the scientists from these countries agreed at the time that the climate was warming. They agreed it was caused by human activity. They agreed overheating the planet was and will negatively impact our human quality and standard of existence on this Earth. And at the time, humanity, we, had raised the average global temperature to just over 1 degree centigrade above pre-industrial levels. And at that conference, the Paris Conference of the Parties, shortened for COP, agreed that it was imperative that we limit global temperature rise to, quote, well below, unquote, 2 degrees centigrade. Consensus was 2 degrees would be catastrophically lethal. And many argue that even 1.5 would be extremely dangerous. So bad things are going to happen when we heat our planet up out of that sweet spot. And in order to have any chance of holding the fever, the temperature of the planet close to that 1.5 degree threshold, the United Nations IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, prescribed, and I use the word prescribed as in a doctor prescribes medication. The IPCC prescribed that we had to reduce our CO2, our greenhouse gas emissions, 50% by 2030 and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Now, I want to point out a common misconception. Net zero is not the same as zero. Net zero simply means cutting carbon emissions back to a level that creation can naturally absorb and store, the level that nature's processes were designed to handle. Now, achieving these goals, these targets, they won't restore the planet. These targets are simply to hold the planet's temperature, its fever, down low enough to continue to sustain life in a manner that we still recognize it. So after 10 years of working on this 50% reduction goal that we need to hit by 2030, which is only 5 years away, how have we been doing? Well, since 2015, fossil fuel production has increased. Our greenhouse gas emissions have increased. So we agreed for our continued existence on this planet, we must reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And to do that, we must reduce our fossil fuel production and consumption. Now, it's just madness that we have not reduced burning fossil fuels at all. But it is suicidal to have increased fossil fuel production. So the predictions of temperature rise have been surprisingly accurate. Even the internal reports from the 1950s and the 60s and 70s from the oil company scientists show that they knew that carbon dioxide would heat up the planet. And their predictions were scarily accurate. We knew about global warming. What we were less sure about was how that rise in temperature would manifest in our daily lives. Well, the last couple of years have given us front row seats to our climate dumpster fire. We are becoming more and more aware of the nature of the emergency. We've seen obvious instability in our water supplies, biodiversity, our oceans, food production, and a whole laundry list of extreme, outrageous weather events, more intense, more costly, and simply more extreme floods and droughts and wildfires, hurricanes, and tornadoes. If you need any reminders, the United States just survived 2 multi-billion-dollar climate events. Helene and Milton may end up costing over $100 billion. So those of us living in developed, wealthy countries are somewhat protected. We're insulated from this sharp rise in extreme climate events. But what if you live in a country that doesn't have an extra $100 billion? What if you live in a country whose total annual budget is half that much? What are they going to do? We need to recognize that those who burn the least oil are the ones suffering the most. And our current global temperature is causing enormous suffering right now. The threat of global overheating is not just an extraordinarily practical problem, but it's the greatest justice problem that the world has ever faced. And by extension, the most difficult and thorny theological problem that we've ever run up against. We're not loving our neighbors. We are drowning our neighbors. We are sickening our neighbors. We are driving our neighbors out of their homes and out of their lands. We're making it impossible for them to grow the food that they need to eat. CBS News claims just in the last 20 years in the US alone, the wealthiest country, there have been 3 million internal climate migrants who've moved because of climate events. And with the extreme climate events of the past few years, the past few months, that number is sure to rise. Since there is no official designation for what constitutes a climate refugee, the numbers are very hard to pin down, and Jim spoke on this. People that are forced to move due to climate can also be forced because of violence. Some are forced to move, but they move within their own country, so they don't get counted. But easily at our current temperature right now, there are tens, maybe even hundreds of millions of people migrating to find livable climates. We've raised the temperature of the planet almost 1.5 degrees Celsius. That's about 2.5, almost 3 degrees Fahrenheit. The current trajectory, if we do nothing, in the lifetimes of the people on this Zoom call, we will see our global temperatures rise to 3% or more, 5.5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit. And if that happens, or when that happens, the implications are almost unbearable to even talk about. Different reports estimate the amount of overheating, that amount of overheating will be sufficient to produce between 1 and 3 billion climate refugees. That's how many people who will have to up and leave their homes because it will be too wet, too hot, or too dry to simply live any longer. Some island nations will simply sink below the surface of the sea. And I don't know if that billion number is accurate, and I think a debate about it is a waste of time. Hundreds of millions is an extremely low estimate. But what is an acceptable number for human suffering? Is 500 million? 250 million? We've seen reports in the world of hate and the fear and the prejudice boiling over when confronted with several million refugees fleeing war zones. Images of bodies of infants washing up on beaches, or stories about children being separated from their parents. It brings out the ugliest possible side of our human character. Multiply those numbers 1,000-fold around the world and try to imagine what development, what war and peace, what the rights of women, what any of the other things that we care about will look like on a world that disrupted. In section 163, referring to unnecessary suffering, we have counsel. Such conditions are not God's will. Open your ears to hear the pleading of mothers and fathers in all nations who desperately seek a future of hope for their children. Do not turn away from them, for in their welfare resides your welfare. The single most important task by an order of magnitude for humanity is to figure out how not to stop global warming, it's too late for that, but to arrest it short of the point where it cuts civilization off at the knees. What W. Wallace in section 150 termed, while there is yet day. And admittedly, fossil fuel production is only one step towards the restoration of the earth. We need to transition to circular business models, sustainable food systems, stop the loss of nature. We have to restore soils, forests, and wetlands. But we have to start somewhere, and make no mistake, just like any other destructive addiction, we simply cannot stop fossil fuels cold turkey. But we have to take the first step. We must stop increasing fossil fuel production. Thus, Community of Christ should join with other organizations and faith groups and insist that we stop expanding fossil fuels. We should support an immediate and urgent demand to begin the intentional transition away from fossil fuels. We need to add our voice to call for stopping the expansion, stopping the growth of fossil fuel use. Stop building more pipelines, stop drilling more wells, stop searching for more oil deposits. Then we need to look for ways to reduce our fossil fuel usage. We need to find ways to transition towards renewable energy sources. We need to find ways that for those who are dependent on fossil fuels, either for power or for livelihood, to be part of this transition to cheaper renewable energy or good paying green jobs. We need to put those green industries, those new green jobs in areas that are crippled by eco-racism to ensure more and more people recover from our fossil fuel addiction. In developing countries, we must stop building out new fossil fuel infrastructure that ensures more people get addicted to oil and the inequality that it supports. Energy plans that funnel wealth to the few. Instead, we should be pushing to invest in sustainable and far cheaper renewable energy that benefits local populations, allowing those countries to capitalize on the abundant wind, solar, and geothermal energy just waiting to be harnessed. We should put our money where our mouth is. Push the businesses that we patronize to green up. Would it be too much to ask your favorite restaurant to find a way to stop using styrofoam? Or maybe simply start patronizing businesses that have already stopped using styrofoam. Ask your bank, stop investing your money, your deposits, on oil and gas expansion. Don't invest your deposits for more pipelines. Ask them to stop investing to expand fossil fuel production. Stop subsidizing an industry that already has made a few people sinfully wealthy. Folks that work very hard to protect their energy monopoly. And finally, just like the nuclear non-proliferation treaty that helps stop the growth of nuclear weapons, we, Community of Christ, should work with other planet stewards and show our support for an international fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to stop the growth internationally. The solutions are here. As the scientist Johann Rockström says in his TED Talk, we need a rapid transition away from fossil fuels, the key word being rapid. We need a transition towards circular business models. We need a transition towards healthy diets from sustainable food systems. We need to not only halt the loss of nature, it's also regeneration and restoration of marine systems and soils and forests and wetlands. We have the solutions for all of these. The technology is already here. And the first step is the rapid and just transition away from fossil fuels while there is yet day. Renewable energy is a reality. We just need to find the will to embrace it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I've been noting questions that have come in, and I think what we'll do is move now to Rick Bunch's presentation. And then with the time we have left after that, we will go through some of the questions that I've been fielding from the chat and continue to put them in there as they occur to you. And so with that, Rick, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, my thanks to the North American Climate Justice Team for the invitation to be with you today. And a special thanks to Susan for her patience and perseverance in helping with the media resource, and then for Paul getting the pictures put online. In 2016, President Vesey commissioned the Earth Stewardship Team to educate and speak with a prophetic voice to address issues of climate, global poverty, energy, ocean health, deforestation, soil degradation, clean air, economics, preserving flora and fauna, and access to healthy food and clean water. In the intervening years, the team has sought to produce materials and resources that address these concerns, but the sheer number of the issues listed serves to emphasize how expansive and complicated the totality for Earth stewardship becomes. It's important that our World Conference recognize there are no simple solutions, and in the interest of brevity, may ultimately have to choose among numerous priorities in responding to the health and well-being of people and to the earth. The team has responded to its mission of education with the production of study lessons as an Earth stewardship curriculum now available at Herald House. Those lessons include climate issues, poverty and social justice, water for a thirsty world, It's a Plastic World, toward a healthy ocean, until the hungry are fed. And then I have a lesson on deforestation that's now in process. Each lesson also contains a component for youth. And in addition, the team was a major contributor to the 2024 reunion text, Heal the Earth, a Restoration Imperative. The sad thing is that last time I checked with headquarters and with Herald House, in the 5 years these lessons have been available, there have been only 115 referrals to those lessons. Unfortunately, much has been said about the causes of the crises facing us, with much less production of viable solutions to mitigate the problems. But the fact is, there is hope to be had. Science and technology experts across Europe, Asia, and the United States are working tirelessly in multiple arenas to create solutions for new forms and sources of energy, development of synthetic fuels, sequestering pollutant emissions, alternatives to plastic, environmental sound building materials, creative ways to grow and produce food using less space and water. The fact is, there are constant research and updates well documented in the literature. We need to realize that it's important to do our research in producing study materials, but there's not the need to reinvent the wheel. So we need to create a repository of online or an online library to make these resources available also. In 2021, I created a 20-page listing of books, resources, and organizations, and then a year later added 2 more pages to that. And I sent that to World Church, and I have no idea where it exists right now. We need to find ways to increase awareness among our members and friends of the developing and developments and what is out there to be had. And so we need to find ways to get the word out, literally. And the intent is to motivate and involve the membership at large in creating a cultural of vital action as a way of life. It has the potential for impacting persons and jurisdictions worldwide. It's also important to note that the impacts of climate are not the same in all parts of the world. Environments and climates are different due to a variety of factors. For that reason, flexibility in assignment of directives to the resolution must be recognized. Actions appropriate to one culture or geographical location may not be effective or appropriate in other locations. Resolution 1325, adopted by conference a year ago, was a good initial step in addressing the crisis surrounding fossil fuels. And I certainly appreciate the efforts that went into to that resolution. And the resolution that Paul has just presented to us is an important extension to what we have before us, because they work hand in hand in addressing the crises before us. However, in producing the resolution currently before us, that is the affirmation of a climate emergency, it was found to be a major challenge, if not an impossibility, to create resolves that address all of the concerns individually from the team's original charter. As noted, what may be of concern and appropriate to one location in our world may not be appropriate or even feasible in another part of the globe. And for that reason, the resolves in this document are intended to be general in nature and flexible enough to accommodate these factors and provide encouragement to pursue solutions to the unique challenges that each locality face. In doing so, there's a sense of urgency to consider the needs and condition of church facilities worldwide and provide places for people to gather to investigate and explore in depth those concerns as a matter of justice. There's encouragement for jurisdictions and leaders at all levels to involve youth and young adults in discussions that produce lasting results for a just future. World Church leaders are encouraged to be involved in institutions and organizations that are engaged in research and creative endeavors intended to mitigate the environmental challenges the world faces. Passing this legislation becomes a matter of stewardship and justice. So let's take a look at some of the challenges that deserve our attention. Earth is a magnificent living entity, and we as humans are a part of a colossal web of life that connects us to the living and non-living elements of our existence. And I have to note at this point, hang on just a second, Paul, that we don't live in a perfect world. And so some of the slides are out of order and kind of messed up, and I apologize for that. So ocean health that relates to degradation of coral reefs, that further relates to diminished oxygen supplied to our atmosphere, greatly affecting food supply, causing extinction of species, flooding of low-lying landforms such as coast and Pacific atolls, and increase in severe weather events. Next, destruction of large areas of the world's forests, resulting in diminished atmospheric oxygen carbon dioxide cycle, increased fire events, impacted economies, and loss of habitat, threatening an extinction to many plants and animal species. Next, global threats to sustainability of food and clean water, resulting in poverty, starvation, and disease, all matters of earth justice, and largely caused by floods and droughts. Pollution of the air that we breathe. Next one. Okay, there we go. And then economic pressures. It is possible, ultimately, to create an atmosphere with clean air. Transportation, energy, and economic pressures. All matters of government and economy. And finally, the presence of plastics and general waste management. Speaking with a prophetic voice and advocating action to mitigate the destruction of Earth's resources is a call to discipleship. Our scriptures and some of the references have already been made admonish our people to awaken to the needs of people seeking a future of hope, to awaken from an illusion of independence and unrestrained consumption without consequences, to bring fresh vision to bear on the problems of poverty, disease, war, and environmental deterioration. And that's from section 163. Further, we must recognize the plight of many who are victims of war, greed, and avarice as the land is being desecrated by the thoughtless waste of vital resources. And that's section 150. Response to our enduring principles, the sacredness of creation and the call to abolish poverty and suffering, recognizes that peace, justice, and preservation of creation are matters of spirituality. And as an aside from that, as I went around to some of the reunions presenting some of the material we presented in the reunion text, I was called to task at least twice. Why are we spending so much time talking about the environment when we really need to be talking about spiritual matters? Okay, so the declaration is only a first step. Education is a vital factor. What matters most, however, is what members and friends of the church do in response to climate emergency. We respond to the call to be on the forefront of those who would mediate the needless destruction of Earth's humanity and resources while there is yet day. This resolution is the next step in calling people of the church worldwide to be involved in relieving suffering and ensuring a presence of beauty and life-giving resource sacred to all of Earth's peoples. It is an opportunity to revitalize, re-energize, and reconnect the membership to the task, noting the urgency of a call to stewardship. It's encouraging that World Church leadership has already begun to address some of these issues. Hopefully, these resolutions will challenge us to see the need for stewardship concern to more than just good ideas, but become a very way of life. As new resources are being developed, I hope they can be made more widely known and available, and perhaps involve media to attract our younger generations. Therefore, be it resolved that the Earth Stewardship Team be directed to continue to address the issues of climate and environmental concern by producing resources for study and exploration with focus on issues worldwide, and be it further resolved that requirements be in place for any new construction of church facilities to adhere to eco-friendly practices regarding energy uses and sustainability, and be it further resolved that the World Church jurisdictions and individual households be encouraged to evaluate the need to upgrade, renovate, and innovate in order to maintain existing properties and facilities, and to recognize good energy practices and use of vital resources. And be it further resolved that every apostolic field and jurisdiction be encouraged to organize and conduct peace colloquies to focus on environmental issues unique to their locality. And be it further resolved that projects be organized that promote strategies for care of Earth's resources specifically designed to involve children and youth, which consider the use of campgrounds and church facilities as sites to demonstrate and model good stewardship practice. And be it further resolved that the Earth Stewardship Team and church officers explore ways to support research and innovations that mitigate environmental degradation and contribute to a healthy earth. And be it further resolved that World Church officials explore opportunities to be involved in discourse with organizations and movements that speak to the plight of vulnerable and at-risk populations of the world, addressing the consequences of climate change as a matter of justice. And so there it is, ready for questions and comments, probably on all three of these.
Well, I think we need to take a big breath. First of all, as much as we have been presented today with these many and intersecting challenges and issues, and the resolutions that do seem to bear some relationship to each other. Joan, I'm going to turn it over to you just to help us take a breath before we get into discussions and comments.
Thanks, Dean. So Paul's going to put up, I think, again, the last slide that you saw from the beginning of Susan's PowerPoint that shows the different colors for the different resolutions. And we just want to give you a minute to look at that and to think about any additional questions you want to send in to Dean. And we'll give you about just 30 seconds to just look at that and take some deep breaths and just try to assimilate everything that we've been presented over the past hour, which has been wonderful. And then we'll turn it over to Dean to he'll only be able to get to just a few of the questions in the time that remains. But we will keep all the questions, and we will be putting up later in the presentation contact information for questions that you want to follow up with any of the presenters or teams. So, Dean, when you're ready to begin, go ahead and start with good luck with being able to make sense of all of the questions that have come in.
Well, let me start by saying that it seems very apparent that there is such a substantial interconnection among these three resolutions and the intent behind them. And of course, one of the challenges we have is how can we help the World Church move the conversation along in terms of their process for how they order and perhaps even integrate some of these resolutions. We don't know what the World Church leadership is going to do with these, other than that I think we know that they will be providing some opportunity for people in the World Church to express their own priorities about these, and that's going to be an important occasion for how much these individually and collectively get elevated in our World Church conversation. One of the points, or sort of a question that was presented, was is there another term besides refugee that could perhaps be used to refer to those displaced by climate change? I think it's simply an acknowledgement that labels sometimes have become pejorative when used in discourse. And I don't know that we have an answer to that question, but it's a thought for people to consider, particularly as it relates to the suggestions from Jim that people who are displaced perhaps need to be given a higher status, a more preferential status in terms of asylum questions when they present themselves as refugees from the climate emergency in their life.
Dean, let me just quickly respond to that.
Sure.
I think there certainly could be one of the reasons that the term refugee has been used is because there is already a legal framework internationally for people that are deemed to be refugees. The question is, why are they refugees? And so it feels for international needs for dealing with governments, if you can just add someone to a list that is already a recognized list. It's a little bit simpler than bringing a whole new lexicon to them.
Mhm. Very good point.
Dean, I think Jim mentioned this, but I think we need to reinforce that. Currently, there is no recognition. Jim, correct me if I'm right, if I'm wrong, but currently, internationally, there is no recognition of people who have to move because their land is underwater or their island is underwater or there hasn't been rain in so long that they can't possibly grow anything. That we know they have to move, but it's still not a recognized status. So they're
Exactly. Yeah,
they're
that's
in
exactly
limbo.
right.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. When you come to the border and ask for asylum, it's a box checking event. And there's no box that says I'm here because I lost my land to a typhoon that has now my rice paddy 1.5 feet under salt water and I can never grow it again.
Are there other questions or comments that you'd like to either put in the chat, or I think at this point, I'm happy to have people raise their hands if they want to weigh in on what you've heard today. And I'll try to look on the screen. If you raise your hand in the actual computer in the reactions tab, you'll move to the head of the screen, and I'll be able to see you. So at the bottom of your screen, there is a thing that says react. And if you click on that little tilde, I think that's the one. In any case, yes, Joan, your real hand was raised.
Yeah, well, I have to raise it for so many seconds before my electronic hand gets raised. I'm just interested in the fact that two of the resolutions at least have called for educational resources to be developed. And our experience has been that in the world we live in, they really need to be high quality, impactful video, interactive kind of resources to get people's attention. Is there any idea of where we're going to get the money or the people to do this? I mean, it's vital to be done, but has any work gone into thinking about how the church is going to be able to accomplish this goal?
Well, I might comment. I'd like to think that we've already started. I like to think that those current 6 lessons that can be used both as youth independently or intergenerationally, and in each case, in the youth section and in the adult section in the bibliography, there are videos that are listed. But the thing we need to realize, and I think this is the thing that Jim's resolution, the idea that we need to continue to update, and update those lessons even. And I think that's one of the advantages of what Jim is suggesting in his resolution, that we continue that process. And I still maintain that all of us are smarter than some of us. And so as someone picks up a resource, make that known to one of the committees so that we can get that involved in the existing resources that are there.
There's a question related to the fact that these are such interconnected resolutions, and whether there is a process by which somehow they could be connected in the way in which they are considered or presented in some way. And Jim, you reinforced the idea that certainly there will be a process for voting on how to prioritize these resolutions, and that everyone ought to pay attention to that and vote. But I think the question is also, will there be, or can there be a process for somehow integrating the fact that they are so interconnected? I'm not sure who has the answer to
Well,
that.
I might speak to it and then Jim may want to. Jim, I need to ask you too, though, with your committee, with your team, who is your presidential advocate to your team? Is it Stacy or?
So one of the chairpersons of our team is Matt Frizzell, currently Minister for Human Resources, but a designee for the Council of 12. So I think he has the direct pipeline to the first presidency. I think it's a point that I'll make secondly, and that is what I would hate to see. And so what I think many of us ought to start to talk to our friends in the headquarters. I would hate to see all of these get tabled at conference because they overlap and be sent off for study and consideration to be, made, synchronized. The first presidency has full authority to bring to the conference whatever it wants. And we may need to be encouraging them to take these three or some of these three and pull out certain provisions of them that are significant and put them together so that we don't send them off for another 3 years, to be blunt about it.
Well, the reason I ask that is that when I was commissioned by President Veazey to head the Earth Stewardship Team, he became my advocate for that team. And when he had to take his leave, Stacey Crim then became my advocate. And so my guess is that the presidency probably is going to be considering that very question. And I'm with you. I hope they don't bring them all together in one resolution.
Lila, you had your hand up a few minutes ago. Do you have a question or comment? You're muted, Lila.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Rick, when you were talking, you mentioned papers that you had sent to World Church and you said they've disappeared. You have no idea where they are. I'm wondering if you could make those papers available to us, maybe send them to Rod, and then he could send them out to all of us on the website today so that we could have access to those, even though World Church hasn't found them yet.
I can do that, yes. If you can give me a couple of days to do it, because like I said, that was 2021, and I have a whole list of other resources now that I need to add to that, but I would certainly be willing to do that. And even with those lessons at our Herald House, I've commented, it literally takes a hound dog and a lantern to go through the process to find them at Herald House. And my guess is that's why we have so few people that have actually expended the effort to get through it.
So if you could send those to Rod, we'll sort out as a team how to get those up and available. Justice, you had your hand up. We just got about
Yes, it's on the same topic we just discussed. I think the lessons that Brother Bunch has prepared, admittedly, they need updating, need to be available to every church member, not just the people on this particular seminar. And so why could not the Herald publish the availability of these papers, how to get them? There's already a place on the Herald House website where individual preparations are available that have been submitted. I don't know how the process works, but it needs to be widely recognized with an alert to update them before you use them. And Brother Bunch's additional preparation he's done with more lists would certainly be helpful.
So we'll take that under advisement, Justice, and see what we can do after this session to facilitate that with Rick. Paul, one quick comment, and then we've got to move on.
Okay, I just we're talking about tabling things and moving it to the next conference, and I think we fail to place any value on that concept of while there is yet day. Where we had a 15-year project. We've done nothing for 10 of those 15 years. And, you know, if we suddenly shot off all of our emissions, we're still going to keep going up. You know, that there are already millions of people suffering in this limbo of unqualified refugees that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed now. You know, I read a guy that said, you know, you play about numbers, and is a 500 million people too many? You know, when's the number big enough that we need to take immediate action? That we need to immediately call for status. We need to immediately call for stopping the expansion of fossil fuels. And if we go another 3 years or 4 years, then our window's down to 1 year.
Yeah.
And most of the people who are hopeful that say there is technology, there is a path forward, they all stress the fact that we need to start. We can't keep putting this off. So anyway.
So it brings me to mention that, you know, each of us in some way is able to participate in our own mission center activities leading up to conference, whether it's the election of delegates or emphasizing the importance of these resolutions when folks come to the point of voting. And so I would just encourage you each to think about where you are in that process of bringing these issues to the fore in your own jurisdictions leading up to conference, and seek some opportunities to raise that. Susan?
Just one quick announcement, and that is that there will be a podcast at the World Church podcast site soon, where Paul Bethel will share a little bit more information about this resolution. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And we may be connecting with Jim and with Rick to do podcasts about their resolutions as well. I'll make that contact with Rick and Jim.
Sounds good. And we're almost at time, so Rod, I'm going to turn it to you for closing.
Dean, can I make just one quick comment?
You may.
In reference to Brother Justice's comment of updating, the reunion material that went out this year for study is an update in that sense. And I had to revise the last chapter on solutions. So I was told that the church doesn't like a lot of lists. And so the appendix in that document has over 100 solutions to things that could be done immediately by individuals and by organizations.
Thank you. Rod? If you're speaking, Rod, you're muted.
No, say something.
Yeah, no, one's mute button switches as soon as you share your screen. So I had to find it. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming today. I appreciate your desire to become better informed on these resolutions, whether you will be a delegate or you can let your delegation know your views on these resolutions. Okay, so I have put the contact information that's on the screen is also in the chat, so you can copy it or save the chat. Secondly, I wish to thank the presenters for your time and expertise to help us absorb more fully the context and implications of your resolution. Please convey to your team our gratitude for these offerings to a substantive 2025 World Conference. Whoops, one too many. Finally, our next webinar will be Sunday, November 24th. The topic is Toward a Just Transition, Earth Approaching Tipping Points. Now, generally, we just leave it at that, but because we are sort of doing a bit of a pivot. I just want to spend a couple of minutes, and sorry, if you have to go, you can pick this up on the archive when it's up. Because this session in November, grounded in Stacy Cram's September presentation, marks a multi-series exploration of what she called hard choices. We've sort of been touching on that today, starting with some key critical concepts. The first is the phrase just transition, an innocent enough looking phrase. Explores the transition of fossil fuel-based economies to equitable, regenerative, renewable energy-based system. Right? So it's about transitioning off fossil fuels. Yes, but one of the essential words is equitable. If it leaves anyone behind, and that could be oil workers out of work, farmers, or transport drivers, the already marginalized, whatever, then it isn't just. And it fails our recent counsel to focus on the marginalized, those left behind. So come see next month how enlivening and engaging this process can be. The second phrase is tipping points. Tipping points are critical thresholds in a system that, when exceeded, can lead to a significant change in the state of the system, often with an understanding that the change is irreversible. Now, this comes from the IPCC, and they tend to be very conservative in their wording. Let me tell you, you can Google tipping points and you can get much more animated definitions. Anyway, we haven't particularly, little wiggle room there, hit any of them. But when we do, and they converge, well, let's simply make sure we don't take that path, as it will be catastrophic. So I'm saying that, yes, we've been talking about climate change and the temperatures are going up, everything's getting worse. But in behind that are these tipping points. And if we hit those, whoosh, it's going to be like nothing we've seen before. And this is being discussed more and more. So let's us be part of that discussion starting next month. Instead, let's heed Stacy's counsel to face the hard choices. Now, by themselves, take a look at them. And Amazon rainforest turning to savanna, coral reefs becoming bleached and finally dying, permafrost melting and releasing methane. Remember, methane is 85 times more potent than CO2. And the permafrost goes all the way around the top of, Alaska, the top of Canada, the Nordic countries, and all the way around Russia. That's millions and millions of square miles. Ocean currents changing, jet streams slowing, becoming loopy. That's our weather system. That's how they are formed. What's going to happen if they radically change? So, yes, depressing, sure, but instead, let's align with our deepest beliefs, God's good spirit, which continually calls all to join together to transform the life-denigrating dynamics into life-nurturing dynamics. Now, as mentioned, President designate Stacey Cram's September session said, yes, we do have a choice in this. And that choice and blessed community community is so essential in our world. These are the foundations of hope. Hard choices must be made, else harder choices will be facing us later. But God's goodness is inextinguishable and shall prevail. Grounding, enlivening, engaging. So please come to our November 24th session, which will start this series. So with that, this ends today's session.